Hello again, and welcome to another episode of TIO Talks. My name is Warwick Powell. Today I'm joined by Anna Malingdogwi. Anna is a Philippine scholar and a PhD candidate in Beijing, currently undertaking studies and research on economic matters, particularly concerning the relationships between the Philippines and China. Anna's been on the program before, and in our last discussion, we touched on some of the longer, bigger picture historical dynamics that have shaped the relationships between what we now know as the Philippines today and China. I want to expand on that discussion and pick Anna's brains a little bit more on some of the historical dimensions of the relationships between these peoples as a way of opening up a conversation, hopefully a little bit further on in this program, about new ways of thinking about the region, the resources, and the ways in which the countries and peoples of the region can find pathways to a more functional, collaborative, and less confrontational relationship. Welcome back, Anna. Technology these days is really underpinned by algorithms. Algorithms decide who watches what and when they get to watch things. That's the reality of the world today. But with your help, we can also help nudge the algorithm a little bit for our channel. In a world where information is more usually disinformation and cutting through the clutter becomes increasingly difficult, sharing news that you trust and liking information that you trust is actually central to getting the message out. So, if I could ask you to help us with a like and a subscribe and a share, that would be much appreciated. Thanks very much.
Thank you, Professor Warwick, for inviting me again to your program. It's nice to be back, and I'm happy to be here. And I hope that I will be able to contribute more to the discussion, especially when you talk about the South China Sea issue, but looking at it from a historical perspective and what is the situation now and how we can possibly contribute to a solution of this dispute, especially between China and the Philippines and the rest of Southeast Asia. I think I agree with you. It's better to talk more about alternative perspective rather than what is currently now being, the South China Sea being framed as a geopolitical issue. And, many people can
Correct.
talk about this. Yeah. But this
Yeah,
is more
look,
special
so
episode.
Anna, last time you began telling us a little bit about the interactions between the Philippines and China going back to really the 10th century. So the archaeological records do suggest that relationships began to form a little bit over 1,000 years ago now. And that eventually blossomed into quite significant exchanges and trade. Perhaps you could sort of take us back, do a little bit of time travel for us, and paint a picture for us as to what 10th century China Filipino interactions looked like.
Yeah, I think when you talk about China and Philippine relationship, it can be traced back to the days before the European colonization, not only of the Philippines, but I think even of Southeast Asia. As you can see, as you have said, Chinese records as early as Song Dynasty, and that's around 960 to 1279 AD, documented tribute missions from the Philippines to China. It's during the Yuan and Ming dynasty where the relationship in terms of diplomatic ties, pre-colonial diplomatic ties and commercial exchanges between the Chinese and the Filipinos happened, and you can see that there are interaction between the two. I would not say countries at that time because there was no such thing as a Western or Westphalian concept of a state, but two civilization or two group of people were interacting, though China was already an empire at that time. So there were interaction, there were trade happening, there were exchanges like of ceramic, silk and coins circulating widely in between the Philippines now as we conceptualize it as a state, and China, and there was a vibrant relationship, and there was even some between the two sides. And but one, I think, distinct, very distinct footnote, or a point, uh, uh, distinct part of our history as a country in the pre-colonial times, is the life of what you call Sultan Paduka Pahala, which is the Sultan of Sulu. Because in the Philippines at that time, the Sultanate of Sulu existed around 14th century, and Islam has taken root in Sulu and Mindanao precisely because of the interaction between the Muslim nearby country, nearby civilization or nearby empire, that they have a Muslim religion to a greater extent. So um, an influence from the Arab, the Malay, and the Indian traders. So there was such a thing as a Sultanate of Sulu at that time, and it has a former relation with China, and this was around 15th century. And in this relationship, I mean, the Ming court and even the Sultanate of Sulu, they have exchanges and they have royal missions, and it can be actually framed as a diplomatic mission, as we have the concept of diplomatic mission as we have now. So it's very important to point out the life of Sultan Paduka Pahala, because during the Ming Dynasty, I mean, this is already, it's just sad for me, as far as I'm concerned as a Filipino, because at this time no one even remember, or no one even remember the life of Sultan Paduka Pahala in the Philippines. But this is a very important part of our history, because Sultan Paduka Pahala, the story of his life was a story of what you call story of diplomacy and mutual respect between China and the Philippines at that time. And it's a concrete example that during that time there's already that good connection and good ties between the two sides. And it's also a story by which that the Philippines is not a crude civilization at that time, that even before the Western colonization, we already have a concept of what you call diplomacy and how to interact with other countries to a greater extent. So this is something very important that I really hope that the young generation of my country will revisit and will also learn his life. Because right now, to be frank with you, Professor Warwick, no one even remembers about Sultan Paduka Pahala. And and this is important. And he actually had a voyage in China in 1417, and it is one of the earliest recorded state level diplomatic mission between the Philippine ruler and the Chinese imperial court, and one of the most touching episode in the regional maritime history. And then he went to China. He went and he was accepted by the Ming court with grand welcome, and the usual grand welcome from an empire. And it already confirms that even at that early time, the relationship of the two sides were really strong already. And you can see also that the Sultanate of Sulu has established maritime state system capable of mounting transoceanic diplomatic journey and mission, and this was reciprocated by the Ming court at that time. So this is a classic example, I think, of a showcase and a of of the relationship of the two sides that is forgotten at the moment. Because if you look at the Philippines and China at the moment, when you talk about the South China Sea, you can only see, like, animosity or some kind of problem. But actually, if Filipinos would only go back to that point of history in our own history, I think we can draw some lessons that could possibly be applied today, and how the Philippines conduct its foreign relation with China. But however, during that time, Sultan Paduka Pahala, on his way back to the Philippines from Beijing, to Sulu from Beijing, he got sick along the way, and he died within the territory of China, I think, and did not reach Sulu. However, one thing that's very touching in this relationship between the emperor of China at the time and Sultan Paduka Pahlavi was that, because I think the Chinese really honored him and really put premium on the relationship between the two sides. He was buried in Shandong, in Dezhou, and they created some kind. They bestowed upon him a royal, how do you call that? A royal funeral. Um, um, to honor his legacy as a sultan of Sulu. And then And even until now, if you really visit Dejo of in Shandong province, you can see, and you will be able to trace back that, that such honor bestowed upon him is still, until now you can see it, because the how do you call this, um the from that time until now, the generations of the descendants of Sultan Paduka Pahala is still living in Dejo in Shandong
Mm.
province. And they're well protected. They're, until now they are well taken care of. And also the tomb of Sultan Paduka Pahala is well taken care of by the Chinese. And even, I think, even in terms of funding, how it's being maintained, it's from under the Chinese government is funding it. So you can see that his life is the story of Sultan Paduka Pahala's challenges, and life is can be a very important point of recollection of how the Philippines and China can possibly, look at how we are dealing with each other when you talk about differences and conflict of interest, especially when you talk about the South China Sea. Because right now, if you look at the Philippines and China relationship, and especially on the Philippines' approach to the South China Sea, it's very militarized in every sense, and it's really based on what you call European concept of the sea, European concept of what is state all about, which is a contrast of how the pre-colonial Filipinos and even Chinese look at the sea, and how they viewed the sea, which is, as far as I'm concerned as well, I agree with the pre-colonial conception of the sea, that it should be a sea of connection. It should be a sea, where people can interact, where people can share resources, where people can, you be connected. Not a sea that is based on borders, that, you need to quarrel, you need to fight, you need to militarize it. So that's, I think, the one of the very important lessons that can be drawn from the life of Sultan Paduka Pahala, which represent it's he is more than a footnote in our own history as a country, the Philippines. He symbolizes what you call lost sovereignty, a time where Filipino leaders exercise agency, maritime confidence, and diplomatic finesse. His story as a leader in the pre-colonial time is anchored on profound truth and profound legacy, that, the Philippines, even before the colonization period, we already have a concept of how to do diplomacy, how to exercise diplomacy with another country, with an empire like China at that time. So this is something that I really hope that his life will be revisited, will be more taught in our schools, among especially young generation Filipinos, because this will teach us how, to revisit our own history beyond the colonization period that we experienced from the Spaniards and even from the Americans. So I want to highlight also this part, since we will be talking about, how we should be view how we should look at the issue of the South China Sea, and related maritime issues, between the two countries and even in Southeast Asia. So yeah, in that sense, yeah.
It's very interesting because the Sultanate, of course, survived right up towards the period when the Spanish and Western colonial powers began to appear more regularly in this part of the world, and there were some, shall we say, some tensions between the Sultanate and the colonial powers, particularly the Spanish. Um,
Mm.
in the end, though, the Spanish did conquer, much of the territory again that we now know as the Philippines, and began to reshape how these places and peoples interacted with other parts of the world. Not only interacted with Europe, where a lot of
Mhm.
resources were, of course, taken to, but it fundamentally changed how these places and peoples interacted with its own neighbours. Just to give people a sense, by the way, um, uh, where the Sultanate existed, it's somewhere around
Mhm.
800 kilometers or 1,000 kilometers south of Guangzhou or thereabouts. But importantly, in terms of Shandong, where the Sultan is buried, it's over 4,000 kilometers. So that tells you that, in fact, even 1,000 years ago, that the people in this region had the capacity to make these kinds of incredible long journeys and build connections. I might also just add, for the benefit of viewers, just a little anecdote, which is to amplify what you mentioned, which is that on that trip, uh, when he passed away, he was actually
Mhm.
accompanied by a very big group, a delegation in
Yes.
effect, including some sons. One of his sons went back to take over the Sultanate, but two of his sons did actually stay in China and settled, and ultimately became part of the Hui community, which is one of the
Mm.
Muslim communities in China, and they were bestowed Chinese names in the end. So
An.
family
The
names
Chinese name is An.
and
Yeah.
Wen
Yeah.
can be traced back to the Sultanate. So that's a little bit of historical anecdote, I guess. But uh, if we bring it forward, I guess now to roughly that 1500, 1600 period, that transition when the Sultanate basically eventually faded in the face of Western colonialism, what were the sort of transformations that took place then as a result of the Spanish and the European colonial powers coming into the region?
Yeah, when the Spaniards came to the Philippines, and then during the colonization time of the Philippines, there are two major colonizers that we had, and they were in the country. They're subjugated the whole Philippines during this time for long time, hundreds of years, I think, if I'm not mistaken. Because I'm not a history. My major is not history. My major is political science, international relations, and economics. But I think as a Filipino, I kind of understand the history of my country from my own perspective. And of course, I've studied history in many ways during my education, even during elementary and high school. So from my perspective, there are two long there are two major colonizers in my country. First is the Spaniards, and second is how do you call that, the Americans. So when the Spaniards came, and you have to remember, Professor Warwick, that during the time of the Spaniards in the Philippines, that's 1521. But I think the official colonizing time is around 1521, so 15 after 1521, because that was the time that Magellan discovered the Philippines. So but during that time, if you really look at the Spaniards colonization, 1565, that's in Cebu, that's started the formal colonization of the Philippines by the Spaniards. So the most this the thing here is, like, when the Spanish came, they kind of disrupted the concept of what you call indigenous maritime harmony. Because, as I've said earlier, during the time of the pre-colonial time, the South China Sea, even the sea in general, um pre-colonial Filipinos see it not just a sea of connection and a space to be shared. There are what you call coexisting, peaceful and cooperative coexisting between the Filipinos and the nearby kingdoms or empires, even including China. So there was that kind of peaceful coexistence, cooperation, exchange of trade, and there was no such thing as a rigid concept of borders. The sea was fluid in every possible way. So there is no such thing as fight. There was some kind of un- undeclared understanding that everyone who are located within the sea, and even the South China Sea, you can coexist, and you can thrive together and prosper together and do trade together, and interact with each other. But when the Spaniards came to the Philippines, and I think also in Southeast Asia was colonized by many Europeans, like the Dutch, the British, and all these colonial powers who came to Asia. Even China was colonized to a greater extent. So when the Spain arrived in and discovered the Philippines in 1521, and then they formally colonized us in 1565 in Cebu. What happened there is the concept of this peaceful coexistence with the rest of Southeast Asia and Asia, some kind of was twisted and changed to a greater extent. So and the Spaniards imposed what you call borders, a rigid concept of borders, and that is based on what in a European kind of concept of what is a country, what is a state all about, and what is border all about. So in a way, the indigenous harmony of Filipinos, of pre-colonial Filipinos, vis-a-vis the rest of Asia was to a certain extent disrupted. It was in a way they want to erase it in our mindset as a nation, as a people, and they introduce some kind of rigid concept of territorial so-called sovereignty and a Western style concept of nation state that is based on a European context, not necessarily applicable, I think, from my perspective, in Asia and even the situation at that time. So that's what happened. And then the Spanish colonization disrupted the existing trade networks, especially between China and the Philippines, because the Spaniards were very jealous of the Chinese who were actually in the Philippines at that time. And they don't want them to participate in the trade. That's why also in our own history, there were massacre against the Chinese during the Spanish colonization of the Philippines. So they disrupted this kind of trade network between China and the Philippines. And I think, from my recollection of my study of our own history, the Spanish trade, they implemented what you call Acapulco trade, which is directly to Mexico, and they bypass the Asian trade network. So this is how, and this is a reflection of how the Philippines at this time, in terms of mindset, because this has been imposed on us by the Spaniards. So yeah, this is one. And also when you talk about the before, if you really look at the Philippines in the pre-colonial time, it's a maritime society. It's the life of pre-colonial Filipinos is very much connected to the sea. So if you look at the civilization or the society, it's maritime oriented society that is not too hierarchical. And there are different kingdoms that exist, but they cooperate vis-a-vis other kingdoms from other countries now. Like for example, the Chinese and the Majapahit and all of this. But when the Spaniards came and they colonized us, they imposed a very rigid, not only borders, but even hierarchical structure, very much centered in Manila. So, and Manila become the capital of the during that time. So in a way, the fluid structure, the maritime oriented society was converted into a land based um, or hierarchical political structure. That's
Yeah,
the big shift. That's a big
that,
shift in, because it
it's very
affected
interesting, Anna.
our
Can,
relationship with our neighbors. Yeah.
look, this is a very interesting aspect, actually, and I'm going to throw a few questions at you and see where this goes. As I recall, there is actually a Filipino saying, which is something like "mountains are dividing walls and seas are unifying roads," right?
Mhm.
Um, and yet, what you've been describing is essentially a transformation of a maritime-oriented civilization or series of civilization states to what is in effect a terrestrial-based or
Yes.
terrestrial-oriented um, um organism, if you will. But ironically, that terrestrialization of the Filipino framework was being imposed by a maritime power. The Spanish, of course, was a maritime power,
Yes.
and
Mhm.
but when they arrived in the Philippines, they literally sought to impose a terrestrial notion of territoriality. So I guess that's the first point to sort of get your sense of how that flipping of the mindset, the
Mhm.
turning away from the sea as the connector to being
Mhm.
much more territorial or terrestrial based. What were the implications of that over time?
Mhm.
And I guess, secondly, as a result of all of that, um, uh, to what extent do you think that idea of the ocean being a connecting road can be revitalized again as part of sort of Filipino mythology and identity as a way of charting, pardon the pun, but navigating uh, some new possibilities into the 21st century?
Okay. Yeah, just okay. I'll try to connect my the discussion to that. But just to wrap up earlier what we're discussing about Spanish colonization. Again, the Spanish colonization imposed borders, centralized power under Manila, and replaced also our laws. Before we have oral laws, and then it was codified during the Spanish time. Then
Mhm.
if you really look at it, the fluid multi-ethnic culture of the pre-colonial Filipinos gave way to a hierarchical land-centric colony governed by an imperial dictates coming from Spain. So the sea, which is a once a space of connection, become militarized and fenced by colonial conception of what is a state all about. So that is one of the I don't like the one of the legacy which I don't really like of the Spanish colonization of my country. So and now this legacy has been reinforced. To be very frank with you, Professor Warwick, after the colonization, after the Spaniard colonization, came the American colonization, and this kind of distort distortion of how pre-colonial Filipinos view the sea has been reinforced during the American colonization as well. Because in the American colonization, the sea was also conceptualized by the Americans, and our mindset was some to a certain extent oriented that the sea is like a line of defense and territorial asset by the Americans, because the Americans actually converted the Philippines during that time as their forward base and as a colony of and a base, a military base projecting their power in the Pacific, especially in in Asia Pacific to a greater extent. So and now, so this Spanish legacy, colonial legacy, was actually reinforced during the American time. Now, the question is how the Filipinos should try to how this can be transcended into something that um how the pre-colonial time perspective of the sea can be a basis by which we can transcend our own problems right now, or our own challenges, especially when you talk about our maritime dispute in the South China Sea, with not only with China but even with the rest of Southeast Asian, with the rest of Southeast Asia, and specifically Southeast Asian claimant state like Malaysia and even Brunei and Vietnam. How we can transcend this, and how we can learn from this perspective, a historical perspective. From my point of view, I think the most important thing that Filipinos should do is try to revisit how pre-colonial Filipinos conceptualized the sea, how they viewed the sea, and what was the situation at that time. Is it more peaceful? Is it more productive? Is it more an orientation that that we can coexist with our neighbors without problems, without quarrel? And why we have that kind of situation at during that time? Is it because of our own agency as a country and as a people? Do we have our own way of thinking of how diplomacy and negotiation should be conducted? So I think that's one point that's very important for Filipinos to think about, and how it is now that we are always have this kind of tension with our neighbors, especially China and even other Southeast Asian claimant state of the South China Sea. And what is the challenges that we're facing? Why we are having this? Is it because it's our own way of thinking and mindset as Filipinos, or is it because of the fact that this is legacy of the colonial and imperialism that we experienced under the Spaniards and even under the Americans? I think this is very important for Filipinos to think about and analyze and make a contrast. And from that point of view, maybe we can pick up lessons from the pre-colonial history of our country in relation with China, in relation with the sea, and probably apply it in how we conduct our own, how do you call that, how our own diplomacy and our own approach in resolving and managing the conflict in the South China Sea. Precisely because if you look at the pre-colonial view of the Filipinos when you talk about the sea, first, I really would want to emphasize the sea is being viewed as a space of mobility and interaction and trade. But now, if you look at the South China Sea, it's always being viewed as something that, we need to quarrel, we need to have conflict, that there are a lot of opportunities lost because of this. Second, in the pre-colonial view of Filipinos, when you talk about the sea, it's a multilateral coexistence with neighbors, including China. But now it's always it's because of the colonial history. We look at it as like, economic zones, like territorial sea, when in fact the sea is fluid. So this is something that I think Filipinos and even other Southeast Asian claimant state and even China should think about, that the sea is fluid. It can be a source of cooperation, and there's a lot of opportunity, especially when you talk about the South China Sea. Another perspective of the pre-colonial view of Filipinos when you talk about the sea is it's a customary maritime tenure and flexible boundaries. But now, because of the American imposition of borders, and of the Spaniards, concept that was put into our minds, we see it as a fixed border, that it cannot be. There's no flexibility. So because of this, tension are too much at this time. And another very important thing is, I think, for Filipinos to look back of how we think of our own identity, and even how we view our neighbors and even the sea as an indigenous. The word indigenous, I think, is very important. Navigation and diplomacy, because this is really the key. If as far as I'm concerned, if we really want to have a better solution, a better management, and a good relation with our neighbors, not only now, but even for the future, 10 to 20 years, 30 years, 50 years from now, I think the Filipinos has to rethink and has to revisit what is it for us to be Filipinos, and who are the Filipino, what is the idea of an indigenous Filipino. This is very important if you ask me as a Filipino, because I think the challenge for Filipinos at this time is to connect to its roots, because we're very much. Yeah, well, I understand that we're a product of colonization of the Americans, and we have a little of 5 years time with the Japanese, and 400 years of Spanish colonization. But I think it's very important for Filipinos to go back to its roots, even before the European colonization of the Philippines, so that we can also see who we are as a people and as a country. Because right now, if you really look at the Philippines, how it conducts its diplomacy, how its political structure, even, these are all product of colonial legacy. And I don't think it fits within the Asian perspective and the Asian way of, as an Asian. If you look at Asia, we're like an odd country, to be very frank with you, Professor Warwick. Other you can see the distinction between the Philippines and the rest of Asia. We're very much westernized, we're very much Americanized. I understand because of the colonial experience of my country, but I think for Filipinos, it's time for us to reflect and to revisit who we are during the pre-colonial time, and probably from there we can find solutions to our current problems, which are, most of them are, either a product of our colonial experience or very much influenced by the especially by the Americans at this time. So that's how I see, and that's how I would respond to your question.
One of the interesting areas that might open itself up to some of the things that you've been talking about is the idea of the blue economy.
Mm.
And you've attended quite a number of conferences over the last few years that seeks to explore how this idea of the blue economy can be a unifying feature for all of the countries that actually share that face the South China Sea. Perhaps you could just give us an overview of what that idea actually is trying to get at, and how do you think the Philippines is now addressing or orienting itself towards that idea of the blue economy as a space of regional collaboration?
Oh, that's a very interesting question, Professor Warwick, because to be very honest with you, very less Filipino even talk about the concept of blue economy, even among academics. I don't think it's something. I don't think it's really a popular topic that's being discussed right now, even among academics. I think it's a very new for many Filipinos, but of course, it's not new for me because fortunately, I'm able to attend many conferences, and have the opportunity to speak in these conferences with regards to this issue, or this specific new buzzword, blue economy, and it has something to do as well with the South China Sea. So for me, to be very frank, especially when you talk about the South China Sea issue, I think there are a lot of opportunities for the Philippines, China, and the rest of Southeast Asia to collaborate, exploring and taking advantage of the opportunities that you have when you talk about maritime resources. For me, I always, when every time I'm being interviewed by international media, even by local media, they ask me, how what do you think is the best possible um, course forward when you talk about the South China Sea in relation to development and prosperity of countries, especially my country. I always tell them there are a lot of opportunities. One is what you call fishery. I mean, the South China Sea is rich in fisher, fishing, maritime resources, including fish. So I think one opportunity for that is to, to come up with a possible scheme by which all claimant states benefits in terms of fishery. And how can you do that? You can have fishery management, and some kind of a coordinated way of managing the fishery resources in that area, and maybe come up with a scheme by which everyone benefits. And it can be talked about, it can be negotiated, it can be done through a mutual understanding between different claimant states. That's very important, especially for us, because we need that resources, and that is, a fish is a staple food for the Filipinos, and we have fisher folks who actually rely on the sea for their livelihood and survival, especially near the South China Sea disputed area. So that's one. The other one, I think, is how to manage when you talk about marine conservation and marine preservation. It's very important, especially for us too, because our fishing practices in the Philippines is not good. We use dynamites to fish. We don't know how to take care of our coral reefs, or even in the South China Sea. So to have an exchange in how we're gonna preserve the maritime resources or conserve the maritime resources in even in the sea, especially in the South China Sea, and have an exchange not only in terms of concept, but even in terms of exchange of technology and know-how, especially with China, because they're very good at this. It's one way of cooperation, and I think if you have this, you will bridge the differences in the long run. Because for me, how I conceptualize and how I view the South China Sea and the sea as a whole, it should be a regional common. A regional common meaning a space of cooperation, not a space of conflict or arguments. It's a space of cooperation, and a space where everyone benefits in terms of resources. Another thing I think that is very important when you talk about the blue economy is, how you can possibly have exchange in technology, and how to, to have more in our side, we need more technology in how to do fishing in terms of, recreation. How do you call that? The fish should have more stocks, so we need that. And also we need to have how to preserve the environment. We need that also in the Philippines. So these are area of cooperation that we can actually discuss, and probably have a good relation, can be a start of good relation with other claimant states in South China, especially with China, that at the moment, to be very honest, is not happening. And one more important thing, though, the South China Sea is very rich when you talk about gas and oil. There's this perspective, and there's this some kind of idea that it has a lot of these resources in there. And I think that is one of the main contention why where the Philippine government is very strong in asserting its claim in the South China Sea because of that resource. But for me, to be honest with you, Professor Warwick, these are resources in that area. You cannot, because of the conflict, no one can even utilize it or even explore if the possibility of using these resources for the benefit of every country, every claimant state. So how are we going to proceed this? How are we going to proceed with this? I think joint exploration, joint funded exploration is important. We don't have the money to explore. We don't have the technology. We don't even have the technical people who can actually help us explore in terms of gas and oil in the South China Sea. China has it. Maybe Malaysia has some kind of funding, or maybe Vietnam, they also have resources. Why don't we have a common ground and a joint venture of this? That we can have a scheme that everyone benefits. It depends on how you're gonna, talk it out. And on our side, there is a problem with our constitution, because in the Constitution, it says 60 to 40 when you talk about a foreign joint venture, about gas and oil or any kind of foreign ventures. But I think there's a way out to that. I don't think it's hard to talk with China about these things. I think, as I think, if the mindset um will be changed from geopolitical concept or mindset to more economic, you know, and your frame of mind will change to that. I think all of these blue economy opportunities or activities is possible. However, the problem, really, to be honest with you, is the mindset that we have also among our leaders and among our politicians. They see it more as a geopolitical issue, probably because also of the influence of the Americans and the control of the Americans to a greater extent on how our foreign policy is being executed and formed, and even our approach to the South China Sea. But if only leaders can reshift their minds and see it as an opportunity under a blue economy concept or framework, and look at the South China Sea in terms of an economic opportunity, and the framework is, and the mindset is economic rather than geopolitics, I think we will have more. I think the issue, the dispute can be managed well. I think not necessarily on the sovereignty issue, but even but when it comes to low politics, that's cooperation. And I think we can avoid this so-called skirmishes and some kind of tension in the region, and everyone can coexist and everyone benefits and everyone develop, especially us. We need it, really, to be honest with you. So that's how I also articulate my position in all of these conferences that I attended and I am given an opportunity to speak. Yeah.
What a fantastic presentation of how history can inform an orientation towards the future as a way of not just addressing problems, but importantly, I think the word that I really picked up from your observations is to transcend.
Mm,
And it is a question and a challenge of being able to transcend the limitations of the present by drawing on the resources of history and opening up new possibilities of development and collaboration within a region. Because let's face it, you
mm,
can't choose geography, you can't
mm,
choose your neighbors, and you can never choose the fact that the Philippines, amongst the other nations of the region, are maritime communities. Anna
mm.
Malingdog-Wee, thank you so much for joining me and giving us that historical perspective on both the challenges of Filipino development and also possibilities and opportunities for a better, more stable and peaceful future. I look forward to picking your brains again in the not too distant future and learning a bit more.
Thank you so much, Professor Warwick, for the opportunity, and have a good day. Thank you very much.
Hey, everybody. Spreading the news and getting the message out is really a community effort. I'd really appreciate it if you could like, comment, or subscribe, and subscribe, in fact, to the channel. It would really help give the algorithm a nudge along. Thanks very much.